Script Camp's class on theme, where we will be going through just some ideas that revolve around dramatic arguments in stories, themes and anti-themes, and constructing essentially the point of any narrative. And a lot of this will be themed around screenwriting, but you can also just take a lot of this for storytelling and narrative and writing in general. So thanks for coming by. If it's your first time here, welcome to Script Camp. We do several of these classes a week, and we run boot camps on weekends where we take you all the way from idea to first draft. We'll look at a few slides about that stuff first, and then we will get into the overview of the class. Let's everyone remember to keep your mics muted, which you can do by clicking the microphone icon in the bottom left corner of your Discord window. Unless you're called on for class, we'll have a lot of points where I'll be like, anyone want to unmute and answer this question kind of stuff. But for the most part, just keep your mics muted so we don't get any noise or, kids crying or dogs barking in the background or whatever it is. All right, so let's look at our first few slides here. This is just going to be on troubleshooting your audio. If you're having trouble hearing or being heard, then these are just a bunch of tricks that you can use. We'll post this the link for this slideshow in a few minutes, so you can come back to these if you need, or you can just rewind your stream if you're watching on YouTube or Twitch or Twitter, anything like that. Also, if you are watching on any of those places, you can come join us on Discord. So come download Discord. You can just get a link to our Discord server on our website, which is scriptcamp.net. We are a screenwriting community that is focused on helping you take your concept from idea to first draft to more polished script, with lots of free events and workshops and classes like this one here. We also have VIP member classes, boot camps, and writers' labs. Here's a little about me. I won't go way too into this, but basically I have been writing for about 11 years. I was signed in 2017 for the first time after placing in the Launchpad contest top 10, and have since then placed in things like Nicholl quarterfinal, Nicholl semifinal. I've been repped and working since 2017 after having written an episode for Shudder's Creepshow, and have a thriller script set up at DJ2 Entertainment in town. I teach the boot camps and writers' labs. Here's what the boot camps are. They take you from idea to first draft in this step-by-step practical method with 2-hour weekly classes. This is 8 weeks for feature, 6 weeks for a TV pilot, 6 weeks for stage play, which has concluded, but we have recordings of all of the classes, even the ones that are finished for members, so you can always come back and watch them and review them whenever you need. We've done Rewrite Bootcamp and Pitch Bootcamp as well, which has also concluded, but again, you can watch those if you want. Here's the schedule for the feature bootcamp. We're actually in the middle of this one, but a new one will be starting after this, so after, June 10th, if you're interested in writing a new movie beginning to end. This is kind of like the course. It's how to write a movie 101. From beginning to end, you will write an entire draft of a feature script in just 8 weeks. So you can see the different benchmarks and classes and what we're actually doing from week to week there, if you want to see. Basically, the first half is planning it out, figuring out what happens on every single page, emphasizing this really regimented, really organized style. And then the second week is you'll be writing between 10 and 20 pages ish a week, and trying to finish your third act by the end of the 8th week. But that is tough to keep up with, and even if you don't keep up with the pace of any of our classes, it's always okay as long as we're sort of just giving you a boost and putting you on the road to finishing on your own. So you can buy one of these classes on their own at scriptcamp.net/classes, or you can sign up for unlimited membership, which comes with a 2-week free trial and includes everything we do here, every class, every workshop, every activity, every lecture with every guest. It's over 60 hours of classes a month. So there's the list of what all the different membership options include there. Check it out, scriptcamp.net/membership. Let's get into theme, which is the thing that we are here to talk about today, which is kind of just what is the story's point? What is the story about? Any of these times where you hear someone say, what was the point of that? I don't really love that question, but often it comes just because the theme or the assertion of the work was just not clear to that audience member. So here's some topics that we'll be delving into that revolve around this idea. First of all, just should you worry about this all that much? We'll answer that first, and then we'll tackle topics and dramatic arguments, like what is the difference between a theme and a topic and just like a dramatic area or a space that a story is in, versus what is the specific assertion that work is making about life or the world, or what is a work trying to say. We'll look at fairy tales and morals as just like simplistic examples that we can reverse engineer or identify themes in a little more easily. It's always easier if you just have like shorter, simpler stories that everybody knows already to talk about themes sometimes, because we don't have to recap the entire story every time. We'll look into what goes into building a narrative assertion, villains and anti-theme, and villains as torchbearer for theme. We'll have a slide that I just call War Story for now, which is just going to talk, you'll see. There's just like a little activity And we'll talk about the specificity of theme in war stories and how it kind of works there, and just what lessons we can extrapolate from that into how theme writing works in general. We'll talk about symbolism and motifs and all these things that people love to go on and on about in English class, and how they more pertinently relate to screenwriting. Not just we don't want to talk too much in the abstract about these things. We want really concrete examples of what are these things and how to use them, because so often this discussion of theme goes into, this very mystical, nebulous kind of it's all in your heart and your spirit kind of stuff, when really it just comes down to, what is your work trying to say? What are the scenes that you are including? And what are the conclusions to the story points that you are setting up? What does that kind of end up saying? And how do you enrich and identify those elements that seem to be building to some kind of point and enrich them through successive drafts? So the ending is the point. Final moments. We'll do an exercise comparing the endings of the movies Saint Maud, which is the horror drama from 2019, and Thelma and Louise, which is the Ridley Scott directed movie from 1991. We'll also do this little activity. We'll do this a bunch throughout, but specifically at the end, if we need to if we have time for one more thing, then we'll do this activity just called Change the Ending, Change the Meaning, where we will sketch out some ideas for how to alter just the endings of very basic stories to get completely different meanings from them. So, questions and comments during the class you can leave in the theme class chat channel on the left-hand side of the Discord window. So just scroll over there to the left, and if you click on, there's like a pound sign, and it says theme class. And you know what? I am going to continue to say pound sign and not hashtag, because that's what it was called when I was growing up. And I don't use Twitter, so I feel no real need to say hashtag. So I'm going to say pound theme class right there on the left. So click on that, and you can, if you haven't already joined the stream, make sure to click next to my name where it says live. You can watch our video presentation and drop comments and questions in the chat, which is right there, and I'll be checking the text every once in a while, but there will also, as I mentioned, be many times where I say anyone can just feel free to unmute and answer this. And sometimes there's these challenges where so everybody talks over each other at once or something like that, but we work these things out. That's just Discord. Okay, so let's see. Do we have any questions so far before we get into things, or is anyone having trouble seeing the presentation, or they don't know where to click or anything like that? Everybody good to go? We're getting some fuzzing static from someone's mic. It looks like Vic. If you could mute your mic by clicking the microphone icon in the bottom left, Vic. Thank you. All right, no questions so far. Let's get into it, because we have a bunch of stuff to talk about today. All right, first question. Should you be worrying about your story's theme all that much? Basically, no, not really. Isn't that a fun way to start a class? Does this topic matter? No. But I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm really moreover just saying that it is something that you don't really need to preoccupy yourself with way too much, or spend too much time revising and rethinking and overanalyzing and, beating to death before you even get going. And sometimes that can actually inhibit you or hinder your work and progress a little bit. Especially if you're pretty new at this, it's more important usually to simply work on this cycle of conceive, plan, and finish functional scripts when you are getting started. And overthinking this minutia of theme can sometimes hinder you. I've noticed it hinder certain writers early on. And many themes also just don't become fully evident until a version of the story is finished in the first place. And it might be more in the process of realizing what you kind of have than chipping away at the rock or the sculpture, so that you can remove the stuff that isn't the theme and maybe alter some things and make some changes so that everything that you have is cohering to what you were already kind of talking about without even knowing it. So, should you worry way too much about this? Not at the beginning, and not at the beginning of the script, and not at the beginning of your career. Once you have a few scripts under your belt, maybe put a little more thought into this as you go, and maybe be thinking more, how will I be constructing these dramatic arguments, and how am I choosing scenes that do end up building those? But really, theme is something that emerges, or is something that you can identify in something that you've written. It's like something that it makes itself clear upon completion and upon rewriting. So very, very, very good to don't get too hung up on it, and don't get yourself stuck overthinking this stuff. So let's look at some Stephen King. Yeah, we have a bunch of quotes from Stephen King's book, which is called On Writing Today. There's a link that I've included in the chat to buy it on your own. You can get it on your Nook or your get it shipped in paperback or whatever. But we'll have a bunch of these today, so get used to this. But the idea that he's talking about here is, does every story have a theme? And the answer is yes, every story is about something. And your job during, or notice how he says after the first draft, is to decide what yours is about, or maybe he could say, like, retroactively what it was about. In the second draft, your job is to make sure that thing becomes even clearer. So good fiction is beginning with story and progressing to theme most of the time, where it's the act of starting with some kind of functional story and then progressing to theme, and it almost never goes the other way around, where you're starting with a theme and then you're figuring out a story that leads you there to that conclusion. There are exceptions to that. Maybe you'll have seen something, or maybe you know of something that feels like it might have started the other way around. You can look at things like allegorical works like Animal Farm or Mother by Darren Aronofsky. You can look at, okay, they definitely started with the metaphor and the extended symbolism and all of that, and then kind of built a story that just supported and created and amplified those. But in the vast majority of cases, you won't really be doing that, and most stories nowadays are not primarily didactic, intending to teach some kind of lesson or push some kind of, political agenda, necessarily. Obviously, some of them are, but this used to sort of be the expectation in stories, because stories, as they were created, were there to communicate lessons to us, or lessons to our culture, and to spread the, not only knowledge of how we do things, but also to teach people why we do those things, and to caution people away from things that will hurt them, and to push them towards things that we culturally believe will help them. So that's why theme is kind of always going to be evident no matter what. It's just because it's part of our understanding of stories. Like every story, even if you have to go pretty far out of your way to make a story not about anything. And even if you do make it not really about anything, then maybe it will sort of accidentally become about how it's about nothing. So you have to, theme is always going to be there if you aren't aware of what you're creating. Like, the audience will pick something, and they will have a takeaway from it, and it may not necessarily be what you intended. So this is not something to ignore forever, and it's, definitely, although you shouldn't get tripped up on it, you shouldn't give a script to somebody to read without having considered it in your revision process. So unless you're doing one of these kind of really, really pointed, maybe you could take a movie like Don't Look Up, for example, and say that actually may have started with dramatic argument theme first, and then built the story around that afterwards. So maybe you're doing something that has a really strong agenda. And for a long time, a lot of great literature, even things that are considered hallmarks and classics, like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, were directly built to push a political ideology, and that used to just sort of be more expected in stories. Nowadays, it doesn't feel, it can really turn off an audience to be too didactic and to sort of seem like you're telling people this is the right way to live. So that's where that distinction between telling and showing kind of comes into really clear effect. You have to not really tell people nowadays, at least most of the time, this is how you should live. You kind of want to show them this is how you should live, because here's some examples of people that tried a different way, and this is the challenges they ran into and the things that they encountered. And eventually, I guess you can draw your own conclusion, but anybody watching this could, the idea should be that anybody watching the story, even though you're not putting the pieces together for them, should be able to basically put two and two together and say, oh, okay, that is the point of this. That's what this is kind of trying to say. So I hope that the very basics of what theme is are starting to make sense here, because this is really key. The difference between this and topic is that a topic is usually just going to kind of be one or a couple words. Something like brotherhood, or justice, or race, or betrayal, or revenge, or love. These are all just thematic areas. These are all just sort of topics. And every story does have both of them. Every story will have a topic, an area of stuff, and a type of idea that it is about, and it has a theme, which is your specific assertion about that element of life. Make sense? So theme mostly refers to some sort of authorial statement. Oh, and if you're wondering what the picture is here, I couldn't decide what image I wanted on the slide, so I googled majestic animals, and I found what looked to be some kind of painting or Photoshop of a parakeet, Pegasus, chimera hybrid beast, and I liked it, so that's the background now. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, theme. So it's an authorial statement. This is what your work is saying about the topic. So the topic of a romance novel, the area of idea that it's about, might be just love. And there's nothing wrong with having just a really basic one or the other of these. And no specific theme actually has to be that groundbreaking or complicated. You can have a really masterful, impactful work that's just sort of saying something like, love is never perfect, or you can't buy love, or, success requires sacrifice. Like, these things are all at the heart of some of the best, most amazing stories ever told. It doesn't mean that you have to have some new, completely unheard of thing to say that will be so profound that it will blow everyone's minds. Having a simple and clear thing to say that is supported by dramatic examples in the text is going to always be sort of the bread and butter of doing this. Craig Mazin has a whole podcast about writing movies, basically, or just like a solo podcast, I should say, about just how to write a movie, in which he talks about finding a theme and being able to put it in the form of a dramatic argument that you can work towards, and how this is going to help you just write an engaging story if you keep that at the backbone of everything you're doing. So something like just friendship or just hope or something like that, those are not arguments on their own. This should be a statement that is kind of being made again and again, or it's being tested again and again and again throughout the movie. It's your position on something, and usually the villain or the antagonistic forces are here to kind of challenge that assertion. And even if it's as simple as there's like, let's say it's a movie about a boxer who wants to be the best boxer, and maybe he's really small and scrawny, and so your villains, maybe your big bad villain is an incredibly buff, ripped, steroided up guy, and like every opponent that your character faces along the way to beating that guy will kind of ask this question, or they will test. The assertion of the movie will be, it doesn't matter how big you are, you can succeed if you put hard work into it, right? Pretty basic theme. And we see that in lots of versions of that. Basically, it doesn't matter how big you are is the theme of a million stories. And then every opponent that he's facing is sort of saying, like, okay, he's gonna face an opponent that it has all the best uppercuts and is so fast, and our little guy barely beats him using his sort of signature trick. That guy was kind of testing this assertion of, does it matter how big you are or not? And the answer, as we learn in our first sort of encounter, is no, our little guy beat him anyway. Our little guy prevailed. But then the next guy that he's fighting has to be even bigger. And he's testing this same question in an even tougher way. And he's saying, but really, does your size actually, like, how big you are actually determine if you can fight or not, or if you can succeed, if you can win, just raw strength matter? And then he defeats the next guy. And then you're working all the way up to the biggest, strongest guy of all, because we're sequentially, in a sequentially difficult, like increasingly difficult kind of way, wherein the challenges are getting harder and harder. We are testing the same question again and again from every angle. We are asking, can a little guy possibly succeed in a world where everyone's bigger than him? So that's just kind of the really, really simple version of how you build a dramatic argument. You have some kind of assertion that you're making, or some question that the movie is sort of attempting to answer, and then you challenge it from every angle for your central part of your movie. In fact, I want to look at this first before I go into fairy tales. It might sound a little strange to think of storytelling as a kind of academic writing, and it might seem like a boring kind of writing, and it might dredge up memories of boring kinds of writing that we've learned before. But I think we're all at least passingly familiar with the structure of a basic persuasive essay being a 5-paragraph essay, right? And there's a diagram of it there on the right. But that building an argument for an essay on Benjamin Franklin or the water cycle is just, well, maybe not the water cycle, because that's a science paper has very different goals than a persuasive essay about something. But this is going to be like a historical or English type essay, right, that is actually making some kind of arguable assertion, using evidence as backup in order to build its argument. It's like, look at how people debate. How do you build a rational argument in a debate? Well, you have a general introduction that sort of states, this is the topic that we're talking about, and this is the world that we're in. That's our Act 1. Our thesis statement is sort of the dramatic argument. It's not really something you have to state up front early in the movie, though in some structures and formats, like in Save the Cat, I think he has themes stated pretty early on, which is you can think of as kind of the thesis of the whole story. It might be, and this isn't something you really have to do, and I don't really do themes stated as a concrete beat myself. I have phased that out of my own sort of mishmash of all the writing books you've ever read kind of process. But you can certainly see why it's there. It's because this acts as the thesis wherein some other character kind of accidentally or otherwise states or ponders this question. And maybe some character just says it out loud, even if it's not kind of articulated by other things happening in the world. And we can look at that as the dramatic argument. It doesn't matter how big you are, you can still fight your way to the top. First argument and evidence is going to be when you get into our premise scenes, and these are increasingly difficult tests that will challenge the thematic assertion by putting your central character in a crucible that is going to continually test their flaws and find that assertion that you've made and ask, but really? But are you sure? The second argument in evidence is going to be your midpoint through the escalation, essentially the middle of the movie to building up to the break into 3, which is going to be your third argument in evidence. So this is a 5-paragraph essay is paragraph 1, introduction and thesis. Then you have 3 paragraphs in the middle. Each one is a separate argument. This is why this is why this is also why this, and finally this is why this. And then you finish with your last essay, which restates your thesis. That's kind of like your conclusion and epilogue, is where you ask this question again. We might have the little guy who could beat up all those really tough boxing opponents is now standing on a mountain of them, looking down, and this question of can a little guy fight his way to the top of the boxing world is sort of been answered. The answer is yes. And whatever it is that got him there, maybe like his girlfriend comes up and gives him a smooch on the cheek. Well, I'm just basically like a Popeye cartoon is what I'm suggesting. But in that case, we might be saying it was love and dedication that helped him push through. Even though he didn't have the biggest muscles, he didn't need them. So we're restating the thesis, and we're sort of saying where to from here, meaning some kind of call to action, perhaps in some kinds of persuasive writing. But ultimately, this is going to be more like where are the characters going from here, and what is happening to the world after this. So anyway, maybe that rings some bells for you. Maybe that's all just very boring kind of academic dry stuff. But you can see maybe that persuasive writing just requires a certain kind of style. And that all stories are inherently some kind of persuasive writing, because you are trying to persuade the audience that your point about the world, that your theme is true. Do we have any questions so far on theme and argument and dramatic assertions? Some questions in the chat. Twitch, Tom J is asking, is this live? Hi, Tom. Yes, we're live. You can come join us on Discord, too, if you go to scriptcamp.net and get a link to the class, or it's right there. Yeah, thank you, Nacho. Questions from anyone on anything we've talked about so far? All right, let's continue. So let's go to fairy tales. I think we are all really familiar with fairy tales because we grow up hearing a lot of these and just sort of cultural folk tales. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own distinctive versions of these, but fairy tales, especially the ones made famous by Disney, but the ones that we just heard as kids are going to make a good way to study this just because they're so concise and so simple, and the themes are so sort of clear. And a lot of these are going to be what we call cautionary tales, which I think the cautionary part is the part that's saying you shouldn't do this, is usually going to boil down to be the dramatic argument, or be careful of blank, right? So that's what these tales were kind of for. Like, that, if we look at, again, we go back to the function of why do we tell stories in the first place. The first ever story was a horror story called There's a Bear in the Cave, Don't Go in the Cave. So that's what fairy tales are sort of doing as well. It's saying, like, you shouldn't trust strangers, you shouldn't eat the red berries if you don't know what they do. Like, that's why these stories were passed around as lessons and as tools to teach people sort of how to live. And that's what all stories are really kind of trying to do. In one way or the other, they're trying to teach you how to live in the world and be a person. But they have different ways of communicating this and showing this, and some are simpler than others. It doesn't mean that they're worse necessarily. A fairy tale is not like a terrible story just because we've heard it a million times and like it's sort of lost its impact or it's lost its shock factor. They're not going to if it's a story you've heard since you were a kid, it's not going to really blow your mind probably. But you have to kind of study why these stories exist and how they work, at least in terms of the theme, the dramatic assertion, and their moral. The dramatic assertion of a fairy tale usually being its moral. So someone name a fairy tale.
Hansel and Gretel.
Hansel and Gretel. Okay. What is the moral of Hansel and Gretel? Or a moral. You don't have to, there's not, I know you can interpret multiple things sometimes, but what's something that story might sort of be saying?
If it's
trust not strangers.
Sorry, say that again?
Saying trust not strangers.
Don't trust strangers. Yes, exactly. That could be one of them. But if the beginning of the story is a member of their own. Oh yeah, I guess you could sort of, if we connect that to the stepmother at the beginning, remember? Because don't they only go out into the woods because this evil stepmother marries the dad and then hates them and insists on getting rid of them? She's sort of a stranger too. So yeah, then we go into the woods and there's a lady with a candy house that seems all nice. And she's sort of a stranger as well. I think we're kind of learning what the story has to say, right? How do we know? So, what logical steps are building up to support this idea? Go ahead, Nacho, if you want to finish with this one. How does this story make its argument? Go ahead.
it's kind of like if it looks too good to be true, it probably is.
Right. Yeah, that's something the story is also
You know?
saying for sure. So like maybe we could even
Yeah.
say if the story if a version of the story, like different versions might emphasize different themes, right? So if we had a version that really emphasized at first the stepmother seems so nice, she seems so perfect until the dad marries her, and then it turns out all of the nice things she was doing were just a manipulative trick to get into the house, then get rid of the kids, and then the encounter with the witch might also build to that same sort of theme if we want to really focus on that one. So yeah, you got to kind of like with stories that you can just draw lesson after lesson out of, like Bible stories, for instance. I'm sure there's some Bible stories, and there's over 600 to 800 Bible stories in most versions of the canon. You could probably take 20 different lessons from it. So different renditions of those stories have to emphasize one, or like look at retellings of Shakespeare and how they'll have to cut and recut those shows and emphasize different things to find different themes within them, because by emphasizing different parts, like if we spend a couple extra paragraphs on how amazing the stepmother theme seems, then maybe the story will much clearly seem like it's this version of it is about if something seems too good to be true, then it is. Somebody else name a fairy tale. What's another fairy tale? Cinderella. Okay. So what are some possible dramatic arguments of Cinderella, which is the story of the poor scullery maid, right, that gets the chance to attend the big party. So with the help of her fairy godmother, of course. So what are some possible themes of Cinderella? What is the story sort of trying to say? What is a moral?
No matter your humble beginnings, you can still end up being a queen.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of doesn't matter. Like what I was saying with the boxer story, right? Doesn't matter where you come from, because given just the right amount of luck and skill and maybe a little magical boost of some kind, that might be all it takes to make you like the rich, amazing, popular person that you wanted to be. It doesn't matter if you're poor. You can be a queen. Like you phrased it very well. And what are some logical steps that build up to that? Like how is the story creating that argument, Lazima?
Well, first they show her life before, how she was in the slum, and then she still has dreams. You show her having dreams and aspirations. And then she meets the prince, and then there's a possibility, and then she tries to do it on her own, making herself a dress. It's destroyed, so she loses all hope. So then, boom, she meets the fairy godmother. So it's like all these different things started to happen in the favor of her dream coming true. She just had to believe in her dreams and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. And another really important part of, I think, how that story works is the evil stepsisters that she lives with, right? And they're the kind of opposite of her, because Cinderella is, although she's poor, she's very humble, right? And her sisters that she lives with, they're very wealthy and pampered, and everybody loves them, but they're really nasty and awful. So I think also what Cinderella is sort of saying is that if you keep hoping, if you keep believing in your dreams, and if you stay humble about it, you just be nice and don't be an awful evil stepsister, then you will find a way to get what you want, no matter how grand that wish is. So yeah, good points there. Good interpretation of that one. Anyone else want to tell us one fairy tale and what's the moral and how do you know?
I was going to say Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but that's what came to my mind initially.
Okay, so what's the moral of Snow White, or what's a possible moral?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I just thought of it.
Does somebody else want to take a swing at it?
I think it was several actually. One was about vanity, with the evil witch. She was vain and hated her because she, the mirror told her that Snow White was the most beautiful of them all.
Right. So the witch was
the
jealous of Snow White being the most beautiful, right?
right. So it's like the X of jealousy.
Right. It's a cautionary tale about
Was
jealousy, or
one
you could easily read it that way. You could say that the
right.
witch coveting how beautiful and perfect Cinderella is. This doesn't really require a great transformation on the main character's part, and a lot of fairy tales, like, you can't really evaluate them by the same standard that we would a well-written 3-act movie necessarily, because it's like these are little fables from hundreds of years ago. But the witch, or the queen, the evil queen, isn't she a queen? She wants to be the most beautiful ever.
Yeah.
She asks the magic mirror, factually, who's the most beautiful in the kingdom, and the mirror tells her for the first time, it's this girl. It's not you anymore. And she gets so jealous that she tries to kill Snow White, and eventually Snow White ends up, with the help of the dwarves. And isn't there a prince as well that helps them all? She ends up defeating the queen and reclaiming her spot back home. Am I remembering this right, Lazima?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember, was there a prince or was he just the wood or
Woodcutter. That's
the
right. Yeah,
hunter?
I think we're mixing it up with
Woodcutter,
Sleeping
yeah.
Beauty a little bit. Yeah, there's
Mhm.
the allies that she teams up with. Eventually, she ends up defeating the witch, and she gets essentially punished for having been so wicked and vain and jealous. So yeah, and I think having putting Snow White in the contrast with those 7 dwarves are kind of showing 2 different versions of, like, ugliness, right? Because the queen has been the most beautiful person in the land for a very long time. She's, like, second most beautiful. The mirror is magic, and it knows for sure. But on the inside, she's very horrible and jealous and murderous and ugly, right? And then Snow White spends time with guys that would be considered strange or ugly by society, but they're very kind and very, like, nice and very welcoming to her. And each of them has, their own little... I don't remember if that's from I don't remember exactly the contrast between the Disney version and the actual fairy tale, but hopefully you see the idea that, like, the story is about the idea of, like, what is beauty, where does it come from, and how should you treat it and think about it. These are sort of like the thematic areas of that story. So we contrast. At first, she's hanging out with someone, or she lives with someone who is beautiful on the outside but ugly on the inside. Then she spends some time with people who are ugly on the outside but beautiful on the inside. Then finally, the witch gets punished for this sin or this transgression. So hopefully this is making sense. How, like, these morals are often, although there are different interpretations of them, and these fairy tales are so simplistic that any modern rendition of them is going to pretty much have to pick one of those different possible morals or different interpretations in order to focus its rendition around. But you can see, just at its bare and most elemental level, these are pretty simple storytelling tactics that are kind of at the heart of why we tell stories in general. The theme is sort of the point of the story, and often you'll find that point in the ending. We'll have a slide on that in a bit. Let's look at villains a little bit. As counterpart to the hero, I don't want to do way too much on this because I already taught full class on this last week, so you should go back and watch that recording on villains. But I just wanted to touch briefly on the villain representing the anti-theme, this thing I was talking about earlier. How, remember, we have our theme being ultimately the truth, the realization that that your character comes to. Something like we mentioned, it doesn't matter where you come from could be the theme. But the anti-theme is going to be the opposite of that. It's going to be the statement that says, wait, it does matter where you come from. So, like, we might have a villain that sort of represents that. Somebody who is a gatekeeper of class, maybe a king or someone like that, who says, no, if you start out as a peasant, you can never, ever, ever rise to be the king. And maybe we have the story of the peasant and the king would be the story of the king trying to imprison that peasant and trying to kill or get rid of him. And I think, am I just writing Quest for Camelot a little bit, or Black Cauldron or something like that? This rings a bell as to a story that does exist in the world. But you get the idea that, like, he represents the anti-theme. He is the force in the world that asserts, no, it does matter where you come from. You are too small to make a difference. You can never rise up and be a noble. So they are the embodiment of this force that's going to test your hero and test your dramatic argument at every turn, because everything the king does is going to be saying, wait a minute, no, you can't win. You can't succeed. You're a peasant. You're not born rich, so you can never become rich. So therefore, everything that he does as an extension of that is going to be supporting his argument, because if he defeats the peasant, if he breaks the peasant's spirit or captures and murders him or whatever he's trying to do to defeat this peasant, if he succeeds, then his argument is clearly true, within the context of the story. The conflict and contrast between your hero and villain are often going to form this central dramatic argument for the movie. And often your villain is going to be either come from the same background or the opposite background as your hero, so as to highlight this contrast between them. And if they come from the same background, then they'll have some kind of ideological point of divergence, wherein, like Indiana Jones and Belloc, we have over here, one of them is an archaeologist that believes that we should be digging up artifacts to preserve them in museums and for their historical value and all these things, and one of them thinks that we should sell them for profit and, give them to Nazis so they can use them as super weapons and, bad stuff. So they both are archaeologists. They both believe in this, or they both do the same stuff, but they're doing it for opposite reasons, which just makes a really compelling and clear way to build this dramatic argument is through using your villain, because the villain is also probably going to be the one who most clearly articulates what the anti-theme is. They don't ever really have to say it out loud, but they should show us that it's true, or that it's that it is feasible. Like, there should be an argument there. If your hero just starts to seem like they're just right and the theme is just true and it's just true and it's just true, then you get into the territory of what makes a lot of people very kind of uneasy with religious fiction, I guess I would say, which is not to say that all religious fiction is bad storytelling, but it won't, if it often does come from this approach of there's only one solution to this problem, and the main character knows it and is just going to persist in being right because they're the true and pure one, and they know the truth, and they're just going to be loyal and faithful because those stories are trying to build from the dramatic argument and then, backfill a story to kind of get there. Any ideological fiction, whether it's political or religious or philosophical, any fiction like that has such a clear agenda going into it, is going to work a little bit differently and is going to be more on the nose about this sort of stuff. All right, so hopefully that just gives you some things to think about when it comes to villains as counterparts to heroes, and as sort of they are going to represent the theme being true, or like the main character overcoming that villain is going to be their way of asserting that the theme of the story is true, or that the truth of the story is true. The truth is true. You see what I mean? Let's do this war story slide. And this is a brand new class that I just made very recently, so who knows where some of these things are going. Maybe I'll go off on tangents and we'll find all kinds of new fun topics to talk about. But let's just start with this. Here's a story for you. A guy's forced to go to war, so he does, and it's difficult, but it's not that difficult, and he comes home with no real lasting injuries, and it's basically fine. The end. What's wrong with this story? What is the assertion that it makes? What could we read from this, and what does the author sort of seem like they're intending to argue about life? Anyone can feel free to unmute, or you can answer in text.
The main character, can you hear me?
I hear you, go ahead.
Oh yeah, the main character, he doesn't seem like, it's not difficult, so it doesn't seem like he has any obstacles to overcome.
Yeah, no difficult obstacles to overcome. It might be kind of boring to watch, in theory. What about just theme-wise?
Yeah.
What's the assertion that it's seeming to make about the world or life, or what argument is this building?
It's saying it's easy. Life is easy. Maybe that's the kind of thing that it's trying to get across.
Life is just,
or
no matter what happens.
Yeah.
It's fine. Life is just easy.
Yeah.
That might be what the author is intending to argue here. Yeah. Do you think most people would agree with that theme, or that dramatic assertion? Right, exactly. So that's where the importance of like the truth in your theme has to sort of really become clear and become evident. Like, not every dramatic argument is good. I know that sounds silly, but just because you're making a dramatic argument doesn't mean it's going to be one that's going to convince anyone. Or like, just because you build your argument well doesn't mean that the point you're making is going to sum up to anything that's going to matter to anyone. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like, let's change it a little bit. How do we, and this could be from anybody at all, how do we change this? This is just a couple sentences of story, so don't get too fancy here. But what would you change here to make this story make the assertion that war is completely pointless, such as in the style of an anti-war protest film? What would we do differently in just this couple sentences? Let me get one volunteer for this. Maybe that'll be easier than calling on separate people for everyone. Who wants to do this activity?
You're trying to accomplish, but you're trying to rewrite this, you said?
Yeah. you don't have to do any fancy prose or anything like that. We're just changing one or two things about this little basic 3-sentence anecdote to give it different impact and different effect. Do you want to participate? No? Okay. I'm calling on Nacho then. All right, Nacho, get over here.
Okay. So a guy's forced to go. Hold on, I'm just trying to read it clear. A guy's forced to go to war, so he does. It's really, really difficult, and he comes home with no legs, no arms. He's like, incredibly just the worst possible experience. Not just that, but he's tortured. He goes through whatever horrible, horrible experience. And then, he learns that actually, it was a mistake. The war was based on a mistake, and his whole time he's fighting for his country that he, loves so strongly. He has such a strong will to resist the torture because his strong feelings for his country, and then he finds out, actually, everything that he did, his country just sort of like give it back to the other country.
I don't know that any country has ever been bold enough to say that the war was a misunderstanding. I mean, that would be incredible if that ever happened. But yeah, like this, you're totally right. This would build the argument that you're saying. I like how you're making the main character start as an example or as like a poster boy for the anti-theme to begin with, which is that war is good and means something. So you're saying your main character is starting as someone from that position who then goes, I guess in this version it would probably be better if he signed up though rather than being forced to go, right?
Yeah, totally agree.
Right. So if he willingly goes, he volunteers to go to war, and then it's horrible and all his friends die terribly and it's all pointless, then he comes home and finds out the war was a misunderstanding, everyone goes back home, nobody gained or lost anything, then yeah, that would absolutely be painting this, really clear kind of picture that war is for nothing. All right, let's change something to say war is awesome, and it's the answer. And this would be sort of like World War II propaganda.
Wow,
ahead,
war is awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it would be like someone who is kind of, bullied or a nerd or somebody who just has a really, tough time, like, sort of, I don't know, a tough time in life, and he is forced to go to war, and he doesn't want to go, but he gets there, and then he finds sort of like purpose and meaning and brotherhood, and, and he turns out to be the badass sniper of the whole squadron or whatever, and he just, wrecks all these giant invading alien bugs or something, or whatever it is that they're fighting. Yeah, basically. Or you kind of make it. I think to say war is awesome, you almost have to make the other side seem like not, less human or less, like you're not going to see. It's like a less nuanced look at the enemy.
Yeah, it's
right.
Either that they're
it's more like a video game.
Or they're like so horribly evil that they're basically monsters. And you see stuff like that in propaganda all the time.
Yeah, like you just go to war against Nazis or whatever, some group that's like, oh, they're so evil. Like, okay, this guy's badass. He's like,
Yeah, the nice thing about Nazis is that they actually make a pretty easy dramatic argument, don't they? That's kind of like why they come up in so many stories and anecdotes.
Exactly.
And arguments. It's just like, no, they're pretty much just evil. There's like almost no any argument you can make for why they're doing what they're doing just sounds so selfish and awful, or at best, or like maybe brainwashed at best, and like just pure evil if not. So like you can see why so many stories feature them. But yeah, so if we say he's doesn't want to go to war, but he goes there and then he learns that if he just gives it a shot and works together with his squad mates, he ends up being a hero and saving the day. And then what would the ending of that one be?
The ending would be I would still I would be tempted to make him sacrifice himself, whatever, but
You can.
I guess that doesn't fit with the theme, like it's so badass that it's, you know, glorious even in death or something, you know.
That might
but I
start to
think
get,
it,
yeah, if it was propaganda, they probably wouldn't get that nuanced. I think you're just good instinct, your good storyteller instinct is taking over a little bit. But if it was just propaganda, you wouldn't want to show a cost.
Yeah.
You want to see like there's no cost at all.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So he comes back and like he's resolves those social problems that he had because now he's a different person, right?
Like everyone
and so now, yeah, and not just that because of his experience, but he is different now. He has learned what's really important in life,
right.
which is war, or whatever, which is like brotherhood, and you know. And so maybe probably some
even be just like all the children that he rescued back in the village overseas, and they're all just cheering, waving American flags or something.
Yes. Wow, man. Yeah, that's, you know, you're gonna get hired by a propaganda minister. Yeah, that's good.
These are good examples. So those are sort of like opposite examples we can look at, just like really, really, really simple and easy ways to build dramatic arguments. You don't have to have any nuance to have a dramatic argument. Like I said, a dramatic argument doesn't have to be good. It just has to be clear. What about this last one? Love is the only thing that can stop war. Still you, Nacho.
Wow. Okay, so he
maybe a romance or historical drama.
Yeah, so he is, you know, he marries his sweetheart before he goes to war, but she cheats on him or something or whatever. It just, things are bad during the war, and he gets captured, and he falls in love with the, you know, the guard who's guarding him or whatever, the
right.
and
Nazi, like,
somehow, you know, yeah,
the Eva Braun or someone like that. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly, and together they, you know, rescue the people from the camp where he's being held, and, you know, like together, I don't know, somehow they defeat the enemy to get, you know, through love, you know.
Yeah, that's good.
Or maybe, like, and maybe he sacrificed himself. Yeah.
He sacrifices himself, sure. And maybe if we did that, then like the ending would be something like she's pregnant now, and then the ending is a montage of their kids.
Yes.
Up and being
oh
a
yeah.
Who,
whoa.
You know, like ends up writing the World Peace Treaty or something.
You're good, Connor.
That's terrible. But you know, it's,
I like that.
It's a World War II comic book, I guess. But you can see, I like how you started though. You were doing the right thing of starting with a character that embodies the anti-theme. So you began with him disillusioned with love because he was cheated on before he goes into the war, right? You'd probably say that's why he's going to go sign up, because he doesn't believe that love matters or is real or is meaningful. So yeah, great. That totally works fine. And while he's in the war, I think you probably want to emphasize that this prison guard that he's falling in love with, she herself is sort of disillusioned with love, probably for, you know, opposite reasons or like, you know, the same reason. And then when they get together, like that challenge has to sort of be at the center of the movie. Can love, like, what is the power or impact of love? These kind of questions. So yeah, that would be like a cheesy, very silly kind of, you know, pulp version of that story. I hope that this story. Go ahead.
Gonna say, I mean, it could be interesting, just like interrogation scenes, like they're so, you know what I mean, like somehow could you have a series of interrogation scenes where the two people fall in love over, you know, you know what I'm saying?
This could almost be
like isn't there some kind of scientific number of questions that if you ask each other, then you fall in love, or supposedly? I don't know. It seems like really it'd be fun to write those interrogation scenes.
Be like, you know, where'd you stash the documents? Where are the American fortifications? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? What shows do you like? Stuff like that. That'd be so funny. Yeah, maybe there's something there, just like in terms of, at least to me, that reads as funny. I don't know. Maybe in like something like The Lives of Others, that you could do a scene where somebody's actually falling in love with someone that they are interrogating or whatever. Because in that movie we sort of see something like that, but. Regardless, yeah.
Great movie.
Totally do that. Yeah, I love Lives of Others. So let's look at something like this is just the last bit in the continuation of the war slide. Think of I don't want to say movie, it's a book, but there are multiple movies of it. All Quiet on the Western Front, which could essentially be summed up as the entire story is Guy goes to war with no real strong ideological dog in the fight. All his friends die terribly. He's miserable and hopeless, but he fights and fights and fights to survive, and then the war is over. Basically, like on the last day of the war, he gets killed and no one notices or cares. What is the author's position on the topic here, and how do we know? What kind of theme is this building?
It's like the theme is like nothing really matters. Like it's really like everything goes to shit anyway. Like
So, do you think the story is saying that nothing matters at all ever in the entire world? I mean, that's not an impossible assertion to make. You could, in theory, make some kind of assertion like that. I would say, though, that it's making some kind of argument because the character is completely miserable, right? If the story was saying nothing matters, then I think he would go to war, he wouldn't care. He's miserable, he doesn't care. His friends die, he doesn't care. Then he dies, he doesn't care. You could do that. Like, that would be, I mean, maybe a kind of very bleak little story.
Okay.
But So let's look at what actually happens, though. So he goes to war. He doesn't really have any understanding of the grander political events. So he's not there for any ideology. All his friends die terribly. He fights and he fights no matter how hard he tries. At the end of the war, finally, he gets killed and no one cares or notices. So to me, that sort of seems like it's asserting, like, the author has some kind of opinion here. Anyone want to take a swing, either Lizima again or anyone want to take a swing at what do you think the author is sort of saying with this? And there's not one right answer here.
I think maybe that death is the end of war. Because
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, death itself is the end.
So it's sort of like the only escape. It's like now that he has died. If you look at the last lines, his face had an expression of calm, as though glad the end had come. So I think I see what you're saying, that the only way that any person will get away from war is if they're dead. And that it's this all-powerful, all-encompassing, all-consuming kind of, oppressive monster that will just continue to grind people down, and only the dead are free from it. I think is that sort of what you're saying?
Well, yeah. Also, all of this is bringing back a lot of actual true stories of people that I met when I was in the Army, working with wounded warriors, and one of them was the guy was serving as a Marine with both of his brothers, and one of them died, and then the other one died in his arms. So he tried to kill himself, but it didn't work. And when he was actually forced to come back to the mainland to begin a healing process as a result of having lost his two brothers already, and had some injuries himself as well. But upon the attendance of the last brother who died, the one who died in his arms, on the way home from the funeral, the entire family, all his nephews and from his brother's wife, and I think she had 3 kids, they were all killed in a car accident.
Goodness.
On the way home from the funeral.
On the way home from the funeral? That's so horrible.
Yeah.
Goodness, that you can't even.
Yeah, that really happened.
The story. That's like more horrible than anything that would happen in fiction for the most part.
That is
I know. It's crazy.
That is very sad.
Yeah.
But so I guess
there was another one. There's actually a lot of these stories. I mean, if you access the community of veterans, of wounded veterans, you'll find so many stories like this. True stories.
And I think a lot of war fiction kind of comes to reflect this attitude that there's no way that you can go through that and think that war is like this amazing thing that's going to solve all your. Earlier on, we were talking about this version of the story where a guy goes to war, nothing bad really happens, it's kind of fine, he comes home and everything's better, everyone respects him now, when that's not really a lot of people's real experience, and that's why so much of this truth comes from people who've actually been through these things. the author of All Quiet on the Western Front. This is about World War One, but like similar feelings, similar takeaways from the war, similar injuries, and I believe, what was his name again? A lot of authors who lived, or a lot of people who lived through World War One became authors afterwards and had to use fiction to kind of cope with what they went through. J.R.R. Tolkien, for instance, lived through World War One and fought and died didn't die, but had a lot of his friends die and had to kind of use the building of this fantasy story and this fantasy series as a way to kind of like mentally cope with that in some ways. Eric, where is it? I just want to have the author's name. Eric Maria Remarque. Okay. Anyway, so let's maybe move away from super sad war stories, and let's go into symbolism. And of course, my first slide has Nazi stuff on it, so I guess we're not fully away from Nazis yet. But so what is symbolism, and how are we using this? And what are some good examples of this? I think I did pick this Nazi flag scene in this movie because it uses a lot of very, very clear, bold symbolism that you could perhaps say it's sort of, quote, in your face, meaning like it's not really subtle, but sometimes it doesn't need to be subtle. The best sort of symbolism is going to be the ones that the type that feels very organic to the world that it's in. Let's just start with this easy one. This is Danny's bedroom in American History X, which is a crime drama from 1998. What does this wall of paraphernalia symbolize? What might it later indicate when Danny and his brother work together to remove it and throw it away? This is not a trick question. Anybody, go ahead.
Doesn't mean how it shows the tearing down of his what he believes, or or what Danny and his brother they maybe they stood for this one time, and when they tear it down, it shows the tear down of their belief in their own lives from what they experienced.
Yeah, exactly. So it's if the posters symbolize his devotion to the cause, them tearing down the posters, they show us that he is moving away from that cause. He doesn't believe that stuff anymore. So yeah, that's just like a really clear example because people who want to show their dedication or devotion to something might get a tattoo of it, or they might put up a poster or a flag of it, and that's just like a really easy way to cinematically demonstrate that something has occurred. Symbolism is just a nice way of showing what is going on inside characters' heads and within the kind of dramatic argument of the movie. So, like, if you have a character that they have one baseball cap that they always wear that has a political affiliation or sports team on there, and then at some point in the movie there's a shot of them taking it off and throwing it in the trash, I think we can really clearly see how that very basic symbolism has been used to show that something has occurred, something's changed within the character. So symbolism doesn't have to be this kind of fancy, mystical thing. It's on a very practical level, showing us just what's going on with the characters, showing us like what is the significance of an event for the story. We could have had that same guy just take off his hat between scenes, and then we would never get a shot of him throwing it into the trash can. But then would we have clearly established he is rejecting this ideology? Like, if we just saw him not wearing it after that, it could have seemed like, oh, he just didn't put it on that day, or he just has it in the wash, or it's just I don't know, it ripped. He's ordering a new one on Amazon. Like, we might be able to assume that if we just never see him wearing it again. But that's why we need that really clear shot of him throwing it away, throwing it in the fire. If someone's quitting drinking, we show them pouring out the bottle, smashing the bottle, something like that just shows what has happened with that character. So symbolism is actually really common in stories. It's not this crazy fancy thing you have to like have a college degree to find or to search for, which is not to say that some stories don't have somewhat nuanced and complex symbolism, because of course they do. But like, it's also just right there. It's also just the basic way that you say something has happened here. This is why it matters. Questions on anything we've talked about so far, but particularly focusing on symbolism.
Do you have a favorite example from like a movie that you can think of?
Example of symbolism. This is a good question. Let me think about this, and let me ask also the room if you guys have any favorite examples. Maybe you can shout out with those in the meantime, but give me like 10 seconds to think about that.
One of my favorite ones was The Sixth Sense, when with the red, everything that that someone dead had touched represented. The red represented something that the dead they were connected with someone that had passed away. So the mother was in a red dress. She killed the
Oh, The
daughter.
Sixth Sense. Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
no.
The color symbolism
Yeah.
in that movie,
So,
really important. Go ahead.
mhm.
Sorry if I cut you off.
Oh, that was really it.
That was it. Okay, great. Yeah, but you're totally
But no,
right.
you're right.
You're totally right. In Sixth Sense, a lot of objects and clothes and just the use of the color red is used to indicate something's connection to the supernatural or to the dead or to the idea of death. And it's used really well, and is really consistent. It's non-obtrusive, and it's really striking how it's done in that movie. I thought of an example that I liked. It's not my favorite one ever, but just because somebody asked me. I liked how in Moana, the Disney movie, the recent one, and correct me if I have this wrong, but the main character is sailing away from the island that she grew up on, and her grandmother, or possibly mother, I think it's her grandmother, is really old and dying and has to sort of like see her off. And as she sails away, then we just see the fire that's in her hut it fades away. Like the fire goes out as our main character is sort of sailing away from it, to sort of, in a very gentle and non-upsetting way to kids, show that a character has died. You'll see Disney and Pixar type movies doing stuff like this sometimes. The way that they imply that a character dies would be like, someone's necklace falls and hits the ground and breaks. And that's like the necklace they always wore, or something like that. It has like a locket and a picture of their kids in it. Something that they would never allow to be broken falls and cracks, and that just sort of shows that they have died. So you'll see stuff like that sometimes, and that's just an example that I liked that I saw recently. Anybody else have any examples of symbolism from movies that they really like? Let's go a couple more slides in this topic, and then we can maybe you got something else will come to mind, and you can feel free to weigh in on other examples that you're into. Oh, let me fix my slide here. Didn't realize that it was just a little out of the frame. There we go. Okay. Let's look at some more on symbolism. And let's hear some more from our friend Stephen. So symbolism is something. I'm sort of summing up what he's saying here, but symbolism is something to identify and enhance in a second draft. It's not something really that you should worry about shoehorning into your first. So Stephen, I'm going to call him Steve because we're on a first name basis now. Steve says symbolism exists to adorn and enrich, not to create a sense of artificial profundity. It serves a unique, useful purpose, which is more than just chrome on the gills, or like it's more than just a decoration on the narrative. It serves as a focusing device for you and the reader, helping to create a more unified and pleasing work. So when you read your manuscript over and when you talk it over, you'll see if symbolism or the potential for it already exists in the story that you have. If it doesn't, you should leave well enough alone and not try to don't try too hard to put it in there. But if it does kind of present itself to you, if something keeps coming back up, then clearly it is a part of the fossil that you are working to unearth. Let's use another kind of very blatant sort of jingoistic example, and I'll ask Nacho again just because he was answering these questions before. So Olympus Has Fallen opens with the shot. I could have this wrong. It may not open with the shot of the American flag, but it's very early on, waving proudly over the White House. This is a movie about bad guys take over the White House. The good guys have to stop them. In the catalyst, a terrorist attack shreds the flag and it gets burned and it falls away. After the bad guys are beaten, the final shot is of a new flag being hoisted back into place. What is the message of this story?
These colors don't bleed.
Yeah. And what does that mean exactly?
You can't defeat this flag. We can be, knocked down, but we'll get back up again. It's exactly. Very
pretty straightforward, right? And I think flags are just kind of a red flag to look out for if you're maybe being a little too on the nose. And this is sort of what people mean, is if you're just being very blunt in your use of symbols, it can sometimes start to feel very jingoistic, like this movie does. This whole series, in fact, is very sort of like America. But let's change a few things. Let's ask this question. What if the shot lingered for a few moments and then a bald eagle craps on the flag? What would you then take away? What would it then seem like that the writer was trying to say?
Sort of like this whole thing that they went through was somewhat insignificant or less, like kind of like this is something this whole story, these people, they're working so hard for this to restore this flag, but the reality is, or maybe they're saying the bald eagle is the American people are going to crap on the flag or something.
Oh, maybe, yeah. I mean, if I had just picked any bird, maybe that would make this a little easier, because having the bald eagle does add that extra layer of what on earth are they trying to say exactly here? But maybe we could ask, like, what kind of moment could this create? And this might be in something like, I don't know, if Olympus Has Fallen were more of a farcical story, where we were kind of making fun of the, like, gung-ho, shoot-'em-up main character the whole time, and it was more of a satire about America, maybe a moment like that could be used to sort of say, hey, don't take yourself so seriously, though. Maybe it could be sort of used to lighten the mood and kind of make fun of the jingoism that we were talking about, the, like, uber-patriotic America, hell yeah kind of stuff. Maybe a moment like that at the very end could be there to sort of humble it and to remind us, actually, though, we don't really actually think that you're going to take away this message of America's the best country ever from this story. All right, here's another question. What if the ending, scratch all the stuff with the eagle, what if we zoomed out afterwards to show that the devastation around the White House with no survivors in sight?
This is more like a dark comedy, kind of like Dr. Strangelove,
right.
That it's kind of like, well, I guess we won the war, but does it really matter if it's like a Pyrrhic victory, I guess?
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Oh, do you have more?
No, just, like, this is something it would be sort of like some crazy nuclear war that just destroys everybody, but, like one person still put the flag back up.
Yeah, it's sort of questioning,
And
like, what does it matter if everyone's dead?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a very good way of thinking of it, and often this very last moments, the very last seconds, even last seconds or even last frames of a story can completely change its meaning, because the ending is the thing that we go home with, and it's the thing that it's the impact. The ending feels like the point. It's why when you're telling a series of anecdotes about something, you might list out several things. You might say, how about the party that you went to last weekend? Oh, it was really loud and no one I knew was there, but the food was awesome. Well, that might sort of make it sound like overall a positive experience, I would think. I mean, if you ended with that, then that was sort of what you wanted to leave us with, right? Well, it was boring, but I saw the best movie I ever saw. Well, that sounds like overall you thought it was worth it, but just flip it around. Maybe you say, instead, you're describing the party, and you say, well, it had great food, but I didn't know anyone there, and it was really boring. That sounds like an overall negative experience. That's just because of our cultural and linguistic tendency to put the thing that we're emphasizing at the end. And like I said before, stories are inherently persuasive documents, whether you want them to sort of be or not. So everything that you're writing is going to sort of be building up to this ending. Which is why you need to very carefully tune what the ending is doing and what it seems to be saying, or else you have to be careful that you don't sort of try to have some kind of point that you didn't intend to make. What's a motif? Motifs are collections of symbols. Often it's a repeated symbol which is sort of iterated or changed a little bit throughout the course of a story, but it might keep bringing us back to the same idea to reinforce that work's central themes. What specific visual motif is illustrated here, and what major thematic idea of Star Wars is it linked to? Anybody?
It's like blue and red.
Yep, I heard somebody say blue and red. So yes, the main character's face is sort of half blue and half red in the first image here. It's looks like light and dark. It's not blue and red in the other ones though. So it's not blue and red in
Is
all of
it
them.
suggesting that there's good and evil in all this?
Yeah, good and evil. So the inherent good and evil in each of these characters, I think you're saying, is being visually represented by the coloration, like the light on their faces. It's half light, half dark, half blue, which the blue sort of usually represents the good guys, doesn't it? Because they usually have blue laser swords. And the red represents the bad guys because they have red laser swords. And so what is the central theme at play in Star Wars that this visual trick, this motif, is touching on and is linking to? Like, what does this actually mean for the franchise? What is one of the main sort of central conflicts at the heart of the franchise, that the idea that is being demonstrated here visually?
The battle of good against evil.
Yeah, it's good against evil, I would say, like, in a sense of the people you're fighting, like the enemies, right? Moreover, though, each of these images are of the main character of that trilogy, though, right? So it's not just fighting external evil, right? There's something else besides just the enemy, isn't there?
The enemy within.
Yeah,
the person.
The capacity for evil within everyone, within the main character.
Temptation.
All of the main characters are tempted at one point. Sorry, somebody had a question or comment? Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I was just saying the temptation for it.
The temptation, yeah, exactly. So the dark side is sort of seductive, right? It's more powerful. There's more of them usually. They're overwhelmingly just better off than the good guys for various reasons. They're always pretty much in the advantage. They're almost always going to win. The fight against them is a constant struggle, not just with external enemies, but with the darkness inside of you. And like every main character actually has that potential and the choice between good and evil, because sort of one of the like 3 or 4 central dramatic assertions of Star Wars is that everybody has the capacity to choose between the good and the evil inside them. How is that represented by the main Skywalker saga and the conclusion with Darth Vader?
The evil guy was his father, so we're like two sides of the same coin.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he comes from that's actually really devastating for Luke to learn in the second movie, isn't it? Because he's like, no way I came from that. Like, I don't have the capacity for evil in me, do I? But then we see that's the main character has that tested in him, and the villain, who is the torchbearer for your central theme, also has that tested in him at the end, doesn't he? What does Darth Vader choose to do?
Be bad.
No, at the end of the movie, at the end of the trilogy.
I don't remember.
You don't remember? he saves Luke from the Emperor. Yeah.
Redeems himself by becoming good. Yeah.
Right. He redeems himself.
He chooses the good.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So yeah, Darth Vader chooses the good side. Throughout the franchise, he's been trying to tempt Luke to the dark, and Luke has been trying to tempt him to the light, which is sort of at the heart of the entire series. This conflict between the light and darkness inside all of us. So that's the basics of what I'm getting at here with this slide here. So this is a visual motif that is used to represent the conflict in each character between light and dark. The pull from one to the other that is going to create a lot of conflict, internal and external tension, and also just be like one of the backbones of the entire franchise. So that's what motifs are. That's how we can kind of think of them. Let's look at one more example. This is going to be from Carrie, with more from Stephen King. So here, let's see what Stephen says. It's like Simon says. Let's have Nacha read this because I've been reading too many of these. You want to read this out loud for us, Nacha?
Sure. When I read Carrie over prior to starting the second draft, I noticed there was blood all 3 crucial points of the story. Beginning, Carrie's paranormal ability is activated by her first period. Climax, the prank which sets Carrie off at the prom, involves a bucket of pig's blood. And end, Sue Snell, the girl who tries to help Carrie, discovers she is not pregnant, as she had half hoped and half feared when she gets her own period. There's plenty of blood in most horror stories, of course. It is our stock and trade, you might say. Still, the blood in Carrie seemed more than just splatter to me. It seemed to mean something. That meaning wasn't consciously created, however. While writing Carrie, I never once stopped to think, all this blood symbolism will win me brownie points with the critic. Or boy, oh boy, this should certainly get me in a college bookstore or two. So I started to play with the idea, image, and emotional connotations of blood, trying to think of as many associations as I could.
Thank you for that. So here's what you can kind of, like, this is how you find a motif. You find what image or what idea keeps coming up throughout the story that you have, and you find a way to connect it and make that idea all feel like one intentional thing and not just like a series of random things. Like he went back and he found interesting religious themes in the connection to blood. Blood is, a big part of a lot of religions, but specifically Christianity, which the main character's mother is like, I think he probably, after reading that draft, amped up her sort of, religious control over her daughter and brought in this theme of blood into her reasoning, into her biblical arguments and all these things where, like, blood just means several different things that are all kind of connected by this same story. Blood is used as, like, a rite of passage in some kinds of ways. So, like, you can find just something that comes up a couple times because repetition doesn't quite create meaning in and of itself, but it's one of the biggest red flags for it. If something happens again and again throughout a story, we're going to start paying attention to it because we're very, very, very tuned to pick up patterns and things, which is a big part of just why we like writing and telling and hearing stories in general, is because we as humans, again, and just getting to the basics of human nature, we communicate to each other through patterns a lot of the time. And a lot of the best stories will involve setting up a pattern of here's 3 things, right? Here's one example of this, here's another example of this, and here's the final example, the best one of all. So, like, we're always looking for repetition and for rhyme. Say what you want about the silly George Lucas quotes about things rhyming in the Star Wars series, which we were talking about before, but you can really see how he has intentionally matched up certain shots with previous movies in the franchise to sort of comment on something that has changed, or perhaps even to suggest the cyclical nature of things. But in any case, those motifs are there for a specific intentional reason. Perhaps at first because just things lined up in such a way that the writer started to discern them in the early drafts, and then just decided to connect them after that and make it feel cohesive and whole and just much more satisfying. Questions on motifs?
I just want to mention that in some of my writings, when I would go back and read a second or third time, I would find symbols that I didn't intend to be there, and it would surprise me. Like, oh, wow, I didn't even mean to write that. Mm-hmm. I think it can just come out on accident because we have an experience out here, and these symbols are around us everywhere. We just maybe aren't aware of them, and they coincide with whatever's going on in the moment often.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll find them accidentally just being particularly descriptive, like just writing something in a particularly evocative way. Sometimes you will write, I don't know, like let's say a character there's a tragic death scene and they fall over in their kitchen and they smear the blood down the children's drawings on the fridge with one hand, and then like you're like, oh, that's actually could be kind of an interesting image. Maybe we could use something with that later. Something you organically found by just writing a scene in an evocative way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thank you for that. Any other questions on motifs or comments? Anything so far?
Favorite examples for motifs?
Any favorite examples of motifs? I will have to think on this again, won't I? Next time, I guess I should just, in the slides, just include my favorite examples of all of these things right away, so I don't have to be on the spot trying to think of them. The octopus in Short Term 12 is a nice recurring motif. That at first, we sort of... Has anyone seen Short Term 12? I always talk about this movie, but I feel like not enough people have seen it for this to matter.
I haven't even heard of it.
Oh, you should definitely see it. It won the Nicholl Fellowship, Screenwriting Fellowship back in like 2011 or 2010, and the writer-director has gone on to do really big stuff. the main character is a what do you call them? Counselor, I guess, who works at a halfway house for kids leaving the foster system. At one point, she talks to, thank you, Nacho, just posted the script there. You should read it. It's absolutely brilliant. The main character is trying to get through to this troubled girl who just checked into the facility where she works. At one point, this girl reads a short story that she wrote when she was younger about an octopus that got its arms pulled off one by one by a shark that told her it was its friend. And the main character sort of takes that, interprets that to mean that the kid is being abused at home, as she sort of like reads into it pretty far. And that octopus comes to sort of symbolize the main character and stand in for Jordan, who's kind of the central relationship of the movie. And every time we see that octopus come up again throughout the story, it's been like altered in some way. Like we see a version of it that has all its little legs cut off, or like towards the end, I think somebody, like she's drawing it again and now it's whole and it's happy again, or something like that. I can't remember the specifics, but I just liked how that developed and how that it came in quite late in the story, but comes to sort of summarize and stand in for the entire thing. And I love when a character who they at first seem like they're just going to be an adversary, or they're just going to have some really clear defined role, like I know exactly who they're going to be, but they end up sort of becoming the voice of the whole movie. Another great example of that would be what is his name? Woody Harrelson's character in 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, who starts the movie as just kind of a jerk who seems like he's only going to get in the main character's way, but by the end of it, he is like the voice of the entire thing, and like his influence is felt throughout the entire movie so clearly. So I just love when that kind of stuff happens, and motifs can be an interesting way to do it.
That's really cool. I think the thing I love about motifs is the fact that they change throughout it. I love that part. I love that it can start off as something so clear and can mean something so clearly, and then by the end of it, it can mean like quite literally the exact opposite. Like, yeah. I keep coming back to the example of like Parasite, but I just think that movie does so many things well. Because in that movie, I didn't realize the first time I watched it, but there's this stone that the main character, like the boy, gets given by his friend who goes to college, and it's meant to sort of represent a new or a coming of fortune, essentially. Mm-hmm. And throughout the story, like when he first finds it, he sees this, and it's almost like this thing that he gravitates towards. And by the midpoint, when all of the crap hits the wall, essentially, he clings to it, quite literally, and it's him clinging to this ideal, this belief that he might be able to attain this fortune. And by the end, it ends up being used as a weapon, quite literally. Yeah. Like, that ends up giving him his mental issues by the end of it. Like, it is the literal thing that destroys him in a sense. And I just think it's so cool how at each step throughout the movie, it not only is symbolizing this hope, but then it symbolizes in some sense this desperation and then the downfall. It's just so cool how it can change.
Yeah, that's one of the things you can do with motifs, and Bong Joon-ho movies are really filled with stuff like this, and they're sometimes they're pretty on the nose and like pretty clear, and some people will say that's too obvious, that's too, being too in your face about it, but I think it works really well, and that's a great example how in that movie the thing that is a symbol for hope for him, he's basically the main character. I guess it's kind of an ensemble, but he is essentially the protagonist of the movie. That symbol of hope is later used to hurt him. It all just connects very nicely, and it feels, again, kind of like the I mentioned the Nazi flags on the wall or whatever. It's like, it is a really obvious symbol, but it's just something that feels organic to that world. It feels like something that character would just do. It just feels like it doesn't feel way too out of place.
I heard a quote, and I'm not sure if you would believe this, but it was essentially the idea that you're better to have theme that's on the nose or theme that's really obvious than no theme at all, or too obvious than no theme at all.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would prefer an author who is making some kind of point about something to one that is, I mean, like I said, you have to kind of deliberately try to not be saying anything about anything, and that just sort of seems like it's like a story that wouldn't be very memorable for the most part. I think it is better off, like, if you have to choose, if you have to gonna lean one direction or the other, you prefer to be preachy or on the nose to be about nothing. Alright, let's look at the ending is the point. So some writers will write their books backwards, they don't actually really. This is a quote from Victoria Schwab, who sometimes writes under the name V.E. Schwab for different markets, but she says she writes her books backwards and doesn't do anything until she's planned this ending. And so that ending and that climax will determine what is the story. Rather than writing towards the end and trying to figure out what would resolve those things that were set up and all the plates that were spun in the air, she sort of does the opposite and figures out what promises will be needed to be seeded into the text early on so that that climax and that finale and that final point ends up making sense. So if you write towards a discovery and you don't have a plan in mind, you risk gathering ingredients which result in a different dish. So you can either do this at the beginning or do this at the end. Like, you can spend a lot of your time on the, like, fixing up the theme and making sure the theme is as clear as possible at the beginning, or you can wait until the end, and sometimes you can if you do that, that might be necessary sometimes, and also it just it becomes easier to see the stuff that kind of comes out. It might just require more drafting and more revision afterwards if you backload the work rather than front load the work. So you can also just come up with the ending first more than anything else. You don't have to come up with the themes first, but coming up with a really cool ending and just figuring out the themes that might result from that might be a good way to try as well. But you should, in general, be thinking of that ending early on. And a lot of scripts do bloom as this initial concept, like the middle of the movie, basically, or the second act, which we say is the movie. You need to be thinking of the most extreme that the climax could go, and like the biggest finale you could possibly get, and an ending that would make that climax in the preceding hours worth watching. So basically an epilogue or a denouement, which would make that climax, be able to bring everything home and tie off every loose thread. The resolution of a story is usually going to be the most key point in building a strong theme, so you should be thinking of the ending as early as possible. The cost and consequences, like the characters winning and succeeding at their goal, is usually going to be assumed in most genres. It's not always the case. There's tons of examples, exceptions to this. But in about 70% of stories, I would say the main characters succeed at what they're trying to do. But the cost and the consequences of that victory often are going to be where the theme becomes really elucidated. And we can say that the climax might be the fulfillment of our main promises for the story, but the cost of that action is more often going to form the dramatic argument or the point. And this is a slide from my endings class, so you guys may have seen this before. But so let's look at the ending of Return of the King here, which is, if we look back at this, you remember Frodo is the littlest hobbit in the whole world, and he has to go to the other side of the world to throw a magic ring into the volcano so the bad guy doesn't get it and end all life, basically. So at the end of that, the main character has actually felt such a heavy cost from the journey and that he's gone on, sort of mirrored in some ways, like I mentioned earlier, by his experiences in World War I, where you return from the final battle, but you never really recover from it. That sort of kind of gets at the heart of what the franchise is actually saying. So the fact that Frodo saves the day is the fulfillment of that's the crowd pleaser stuff that we all signed up for and that we all want to see, and that's going to make it feel like a satisfying story. But the cost and consequences of that is going to help us find the theme, the point. So Tolkien doesn't want us to get this idea that it's possible to have war without cost, and this is a complete contrast to what we were talking about earlier in terms of that patriotic propaganda story where guy goes to war, it makes him a better person, it's not that traumatizing for him, and he does a lot of good in the world and comes back a better guy. This is sort of, we have a lot of those war movie type thrills. We have the big battles and the last minute victories and the real triumph of war, but Tolkien doesn't shy away from the cost of it as well. Everything doesn't really end up tied up with a ribbon, and in a fight as serious as the battle for Middle-earth, which he's portraying as the battle for the existence of all of humanity or all of the world, there's going to be losses that are physical and emotional. And this truth that Frodo has achieved his quest and succeeded at his goal, but despite that he can't recover from it, that cuts to the heart of the story, which is going to revolve around this topic of the burdens that ordinary people bear in order to fight evil. And the cost and consequences of that sacrifice will clarify what specific assertion he has to make about that dramatic idea. Joe Toole says, cheers, have a good one. Thanks, Joe Toole. Thanks for coming by. And he also asks, will I have a way of rewatching this later? Yep, this will be on the video library, scriptcamp.net/video library. And this is also streaming on our various streaming channels. So if you're watching along on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, or any of these, or what's the other one? Twitter, Twitch, or YouTube, then thanks for dropping by. And again, if you want to participate in class, you can just go to Discord and download that and get a link to our server, which is called Script Camp. and participate in this free class, which goes on for another 20-30 minutes. And we also have boot camps, which take you from idea to finished draft in just 8 weeks of a feature. Questions and comments so far before I continue on to this next series of slides, which is going to compare the endings for two movies which have a somewhat similar ending, but one really big key difference between them: Saint Maud from 2019 and Thelma and Louise from 1991. So, questions, comments, feel free to unmute or type in chat.
Oh, I just a story is coming to me. There was a guy that I met who he had lost a lot of people in Afghanistan and survived, and it was like a miracle that he survived all these IED attacks. But when he came back in Hawaii, that's where he lost his legs, in front of a church that he attended after a really long time of looking for God. And he decides, I'm going to actually take a step to look for God at this church. And then he got in a motorcycle accident right in front of that church and lost his legs after he came back in one piece and getting blown up and, surviving all of that.
Goodness. Well, that certainly, I mean, that's terrible, of course, but you can see there's some, even in real life stories, sometimes you can kind of start to see some kind of symbolism at times, right? Like the fact that happened, you said in front of the church?
Yeah.
You start to, I mean, real life doesn't really have clear meanings for things most of the time, which is why we're drawn to stories, because this is sort of what separates just a series of events that occurred from a story, which is something that adds up and means something. So you can look at true events sometimes and you can start to almost piece together, like you can see why people look at things that really happened and they say, oh, I should write a story of that can sort of contextualize all those pieces, even those things that seem kind of random or horrible or cruel, like maybe there is some kind of grander point in it. So it kind of does illuminate a little bit about just why we like stories so much, to me at least. The fact that we can even start to see stories in real things real tragedies, even real things that happen like that. It just is part of our way of like making sense of the world.
Mm-hmm. It is a triumphant story because one of his main conflicts was that he hadn't seen his daughter in a very long time, and actually some of it is so terrifying that I wouldn't even talk about it, but of things that he saw when he was in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he ended up being reunited with his daughter in the end, with his fake legs and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually a pretty good ending there.
That's good. Yeah, and if like that was I guess I'm glad that you added that to the end, because that does change I guess I'm trying to tie everything back to the class, but like the thing that you leave us with is sort of the point. It's the thing that we take away from it, and it's the feeling that the audience goes home with. So like it's obviously great that he got prosthetics and recovered and got to see his daughter, and I assume had overall a triumphant and kind of happy ending. If we want to leave the audience with that as opposed to a sort of story about, I don't know, the cost and consequence of war, like we've just also been talking about, then the last thing that you leave us with is just really that's going to be key. Anyway, thank you for sharing those. Anyone else have questions or comments before we proceed? Alien Boy 13 says, what if you're inspired by other media that have similar themes? That's fine. Themes don't there's many different ways of exploring themes. In some genres, they even kind of have a couple themes that they keep making movies about again and again, but you're exploring them in different ways. A theme can be something absurdly simple, something just like greed is bad. Money is the root of all money is the root of a lot of problems. Money is more trouble than it's worth. Or you could say love conquers all. Love conquers everything. That could just be the theme. There's been probably billions of stories that have that theme, but it's been explored in many different ways, and with different sort of argumentative, illustrative examples that show the truth of that theme. You can show the truth of something very simple and in countless manners. So yeah, I wouldn't worry if you have similar themes to other media. You should worry if you're trying to explore those themes in the exact same way.
Well, I'll explain because it's these media. It seems like how um how this fictionalized group of species is supposed to represent like prejudice and discrimination. That's sort of the idea I have for a screenplay of mine.
Okay. I mean, I wouldn't worry too much that was on its face too similar to something else, unless you have some other work of fiction that you're like, they have the same name as that group, or it's the same. The aliens look the same as some other group of aliens from another piece of fiction, or they talk the exact same way, or if you just change 3 or 4 things, I don't think anyone will start to identify this as ripping off something that exists. There's a lot of stories out there, and it's like it takes a lot to prove that something is actually too similar to something else. Hope that answers
Yeah,
that.
it's a pretty much me taking inspiration from Alienation and X-Men, where you have this fictional race that's meant to be a representation of a marginalized group and how they overcome prejudice and discrimination.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry that's too similar to anything. But thanks for the questions and comments. You guys ready to head to our last section of the class, last 20 minutes? We are going to be comparing Saint Maud and Thelma and Louise. What are these endings building? Like, what dramatic arguments are these endings building? And just various questions about that. So this is going to contain really big spoilers for both movies. The bigger one is going to be for Saint Maud, which just came out a few years ago, so I have more reservations about that, so I wanted to include this warning slide. Obviously, Thelma and Louise, I think everybody knows that ending, and it's from 1991, so long time ago. Anyway, so if you really don't want spoilers for some of these, then maybe mute until we're past these slides, I guess, if you want. Let's get into it. So, endings and consequences. So, like we've been saying, the cost and consequence of the ending is often going to help us find what the story was about, or it's going to be a key red flag for meaning, and in illustrating for us and showing us what the whole story that we just watched was about, and what the takeaway should be as we go home and drive home and think about it that night or whatever. So you should look at what happens at the climax and the denouement of the story, but also just the very, very last image, the very last frames might also be something that can make a massive difference in the entire meaning of the entire narrative. So am I going to say entire 100 more times? Yes, I am. So consider and contrast these two different endings that we're going to go over here. Similar events happen in both of them, but with one really big key difference. What is that difference, and how does it alter the meaning of both? Let's look at Saint Maud. Okay, so Saint Maud is a dark drama with horror elements from 2019. I'm going to summarize the entire story and spoil everything right now. Excuse me. It's about a devout nurse named Maud who believes that she's been tasked by God to save the soul of her patient, who's a dying atheist named Amanda. Amanda spurns all of Maud's attempts to convert her to the faith. She mocks her nurse for trying to save her soul, until finally, after she's had enough, after a bad argument, Maud hits Amanda in the face and gets fired. So later, as Amanda's on her deathbed, Maud comes back and tries one last time to get her to convert. Here, Maud sees Amanda turn into a demon, and the demon throws her across the room and challenges her and accuses her of not being faithful enough to save Amanda. So Maud realizes this is some kind of test and stabs the demon to death. So having passed this divine test, Maud walks to the beach and soaks herself in like paint thinner, or perhaps it's like some kind of accelerant, and she sets herself on fire. And in the last moments, angel wings kind of sprout from her back, and onlookers start to kneel in awe all around her, and she looks up at the sky, glowing and starting to float into the air. And then the last like split second of the movie is just like, it's like a few frames of reverting, like snapping back to reality. Oops, there goes gravity, and she's on fire and screaming. The end. Sweet dreams. So what does it mean? What could be the dramatic argument of the story?
I think one is you can't force anyone to change.
Yeah, can you explain?
Like she kept trying to, change her to, get her to come to Jesus or change her faith so she wouldn't burn in damnation, and then ended up demonizing that person when they weren't really wanting to. She couldn't do it, so she ended up committing a sin to, and she ended up committing a sin to get her goal, which she became exactly the person that she was trying to save. And then at the end, she was the one that ended up burning.
Yeah, so pretty big difference, like pretty strong, clear message if your last image, your last frame of a religious themed movie is your main character screaming on fire, right? What does that kind of say? Like, what's happening to Maud at the end of this?
What's happening to her at the end of this?
Yeah, what do we think is going to happen to her soul, basically? What is the movie saying?
She's going to go to the hell that she was saying that other person was going to go to.
Yeah, exactly. So having that one split second at the very end where it shows, wait, nope, she's not actually going to heaven. This wasn't really a good thing. It's not real. This like over proselytizing and over devotion has driven her crazy, basically. Do you think that Amanda actually turned into a demon, or did Maud just murder her patient?
I feel like she demonized her in her mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's because she didn't want to listen. She decided, oh, she must be a demon.
Right. And I think I don't remember in the movie I don't think it actually goes back and shows, wait, no, she wasn't actually a demon. It was all a hallucination. But this very last second where it shows she's not, like things as they really are, draws into question, oh, that must have been fake as well. It must have been that she's sort of driven herself crazy with all this fervor to convert and change Amanda, but ultimately you can't kind of change someone who doesn't want to be changed. How would this theme be different if the final shot were just Maud rising to heaven? What if we didn't have that last second?
I have a thought on this.
Okay.
I don't know if it's valid. Maybe she was, she had a demon of religiosity. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of that there are certain demons that, they're demons of religiosity.
I'm not sure what that means exactly.
Like, you can be so religious, and that's actually comes from evil spirits.
Oh, it's like sinful to be too religious, basically?
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of like the very simple way of thinking of it. It's actually something that it's, a little bit of leaven's the whole lump kind of thing, where the more you practice this way, the more you become, like what Lazima was saying, having that spirit of well, it's judgmentalism for one thing. You're being judgmental of other people because they're not doing the things that you do. Because here it says, how would it have changed? How would the theme change if Maud were instead able to convince Amanda to convert and they end up going to Mass? I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Mass per se or anything like that, but there are a lot of religious practices that maybe, are just not for some people, certain belief systems that are very unconventional beliefs that many people don't believe in. For example, that the body and the blood symbols in the Catholic Church actually become the actual body and blood of Christ when they bless it. Mm-hmm. This is a very common belief. I know people that really believe this, and I kind of don't. I mean, I don't want to offend anyone in here if they do believe that or anything, but it could be that demon of religiosity, which can be present in any belief system, not just somebody who's a Christian or Jewish or Islamic. There are a lot of different belief systems, and I think I don't know his name, but Monica, he goes into the writing class during the day a lot, and he said that belief systems are very fluid. Like one day you might be a Christian, and the next day you might be an atheist, and then and I thought that was interesting for him to say that, because we're all so fickle at times about what we do believe in. But I'm going to definitely have to watch this movie because I'm really interested now.
Oh, great. Yeah, sorry I just spoiled the ending for you. But if that seems interesting to you, then hopefully I think you would still like it. It's, I think it's on, I think you can get it on like Amazon or maybe even rent it on YouTube. So yeah, maybe just Google around, or it must be streaming on something at this point. I think we're getting a lot of interference from someone's mic. I'm going to have to mute again here. Sorry again. Okay, so thank you for the comments. Let's go on to our last point of comparison and our last couple slides here. And yeah, these are some good answers for how would this be different, just to sum up with Saint Maud. How would this be different if the last shots were her rising to heaven or successfully convincing Amanda that she needs to convert, and then she does convert and they're all happy? That to me would seem a little bit more like what is basically called the Christian genre, which is a genre of movies, and I'm not saying that there's no good ones or that it's not good storytelling, but it is something that comes from this point of view of primarily this exists to convince or convert people or to reaffirm like what we already believe. It's not necessarily meant to challenge anything. It's preaching to the choir, more or less, to put it in terms like that. Anyway, hopefully you get the idea that this the ending that exists for this movie, just that last second, just the last moment that we are left with, is what lingers in our minds after we leave the theater. And just picking your last shot or your last image or your last words are going to completely change the ending. Let's look at Thelma and Louise, which is going to be a somewhat sort of similar ending in one way. Thelma is a housewife who's married to a disrespectful and controlling carpet salesman who feels she's constantly ignored and disrespected and pushed around by men her whole life. And when a guy tries to assault her and her friend outside a roadhouse, she pulls a gun and shoots the guy. And she thinks it was justified, but doesn't think that the U.S. legal system is going to treat them fairly or understand or believe her, so they go on the run. And after many trials and misadventures, she and her friend are finally cornered by the authorities on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and rather than getting captured, our main character proposes, why don't we just keep going, meaning drive off and kill ourselves, basically. So they hold hands and Louise steps on the gas, and they accelerate over the cliff, and presumably that's to their deaths, but the movie ends in a freeze frame with the car in midair. Kind of like, remember, we were sort of ending this movie with her ascending up to heaven. It seems like it's over, but then we have that one split-second moment at the very end. With this one, we don't have that moment. We just end with them midair. What could be the dramatic argument? Why end like this? What is this trying to say?
That they're free, metaphorically, they're free.
Yeah, that they're free, exactly. How do you think the effect would be different if it showed them smash and die?
It wouldn't be so inspiring, or I know, because we all, as audiences, we already know that they're going to go to their deaths, so it's just unnecessary to show that.
Right, it might make it more tragic, and less sort of uplifting at the end, and more if we're like, because you can focus on anything here. You could focus on the fact that they are now free. They are gonna, they're going out with this blaze of glory. They may not have succeeded at their goal of escaping literally, but in a way they kind of did escape. So that this isn't really a failure for these characters in this one moment. We get that just from the fact that we don't show what happens after. We just freeze while they're midair without showing reality swoop in to smash into us and totally change the meaning. Here's what the writer, her name is Callie Corey, says about this. So the ending was symbolic, not literal. We did everything possible to make sure you don't see a literal death. You don't see the car land, you don't see a big puff of smoke coming out of the canyon, you're left with an image of them flying. They flew away, out of the world, and into the mass unconscious. Women who are completely free from all the shackles that restrain them have no place in the world, basically. The world's not big enough to support them. That's the dramatic argument of Thelma and Louise. She says, I love the ending and the imagery. After they went through all that, I didn't want anybody to be able to touch them. This ending represents not really death or punishment, but hope and even perhaps a kind of radical, ultimate fulfillment. So we get all that just from cutting off 4 seconds from this shot of it continuing to arc through the air and smash into the canyon, Instead of doing that just by stopping and freezing in the air and allowing us to linger on that, we take away a totally different mood, meaning, and theme from the story. Okay, so we got a few minutes left so we can do a bit of this exercise here. Yeah, looks like we have 10 minutes. I will, we'll do a little of this, and also let me check the chat for questions. Carmen says, Carrie illustrates demons of religiosity perfectly through the mother. Ah, yes, okay, exactly. I think I see what you mean then. It's like representing somebody who makes that their whole identity, and like their whole life becomes, I just need to change people to make them more like me, and they become devout to the point where it's too much. Yeah, I can definitely see it. The mother in that movie represents a similar idea to that for sure. Any other questions or comments before we go into our last activity and then wrap up for today? Hope that you guys have enjoyed this. If this is your first script camp class and are considering signing up, let me bring up the slide that reminds you how to do that. You can buy one class on its own, scriptcamp.net/classes, or you can sign up for a free trial, 2 weeks free trial for unlimited classes, boot camps, activities, workshops, guest lectures, everything. Here's everything that includes. Let's do a little of this just for a few minutes, and then we will be done. Let's look at change the meaning, change the story. So this is what we've kind of been doing all class, but let's just do this one sort of more focused version of this here. Let's just find the simplest version possible. A movie about a guy trying to escape from jail. He fails. You can kind of make that about anything. How can we make the last scene of that, the last moments of that, say, he failed to escape and the world is sort of better off for it? Like it's a good thing he didn't get out. What would the last shot or last scene of that be? Anyone can weigh in the chat, or can we get a volunteer?
Him walking to his jail cell, but not seeing him in his prison cell.
Sorry, can you say that again? What's happening in the last shot of the movie?
Him walking to his jail cell, but not seeing the jail cell closing, like him walking to it, like him being escorted to it.
Okay, so he's being escorted to his cell. How are we getting that the world is better off for the fact that he didn't escape from jail here? I mean, we would have to kind of show that people on the outside are happy about this in some way, or maybe it's good that he's in here. Like, how are we showing that it's good that he's in here from just showing him walking to his cell?
The last shot would be is that the I guess the people, I think the good guys would be the cops or the people who tried to get him in jail. So they'll be talking like about him and that it's good that he's back in jail again. I guess that's the last scene.
Sure. I mean, yeah, you could have other characters say something like, I sure am glad that happened. I mean, normally we're looking for a way to show this rather than having characters just sort of tell us that it's true. But yeah, no, that you could always just have some characters sum up the point of the movie, definitely. Like dialogue can do a lot of that. Anyone else?
I would maybe show, oh, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I'm saying that you see the guy, he's like in this, he's locked up in this like cage. It's like I guess glass, like bulletproof glass cage, and he closed the door. Then we zoom out, and it's like a metal cage around that. We zoom out, and it's concrete. We zoom out, and it's like this underwater jail. Like we're coming through the ocean, and we get to the top, and on top where on the beach where he is, where like everywhere it's like stationed, where from the outside there are people holding signs with his face on it with like big X's over it, and like go stay in jail, like go back to jail, all these signs of people protesting,
Yeah.
and they're all like
they all pop champagne bottles.
Right.
Yeah, I like what you're suggesting. This is almost the end of X-Men 2, isn't it? Where at the end of X-Men 2 they have Magneto in this kind of glass box, and I believe, I could be wrong, but I think the movie sort of zooms away as like multiple, huge doors like close in front of the all the security closes. That's no, you're right. That's a great way of showing it, and that's a great way they do it in that movie. Is they're like, oh, it sure is a good thing in here. Like even this box isn't enough to contain him. We're gonna need more like security in place. And like you can see in your version, you also had people like essentially celebrating the fact that he was in there. So we're not just seeing a character say, or we're not just hearing a character say, it's good that that's happened. We're seeing people are happy. People are partying and like holding up signs and banners and chanting. And I don't know, they're happy that he's in there. And we see all the security in place that it's going to be required to keep him there. That'd be a great way of doing it. Let's do one more. Let's say he's failed to escape the jail, but he'll always have some form of freedom. What would just the last scene or last shot of that movie be?
I would show an unrealistic scene. I mean, it sounds unrealistic, but it could just be a figment of his imagination. Perhaps you go into his mind, he's in the cell or whatever, maybe something like what Lazima just said. But then you're showing if there was anything pure or anything of good report in the film, then you would bring those players into a complete opposite environment of what the prison is, and that would be maybe like this beautiful, dream-like place, like, with a lot of beautiful green grass, and it's a beautiful, fluffy, cloudy day with like children happy and playing and families and like the perfect kind of scenario contrasting. I would probably show in just one shot, which would require pulling back from his mind to the prison place, and then around there in very close vicinity, showing that contrast. So it could go either way, I think, with that imagery.
Right. It probably matters, like, the takeaway from that is going to be based on what's the last thing that we see, probably. And if the last thing we see is this sort of one, like he's imagining he's on the beach with his family, right? And if we end on that, that's sort of saying, okay, well, even though he's in jail, he always has this refuge in his mind. If we end on a shot, if we show a few seconds of that, and then we cut to reality as his cellmate throws a cup of pee on him, then it might be more like saying, oh, God, like, that's not going to be enough to make it bearable to live here, right? So you could take it either way for sure. And the way you're describing it almost sounds like the end of Gladiator to me. The ending of Gladiator being one where our main character is he avenges the murder of his wife and child, but he gets really badly injured along the way and he's dying. And as he's dying on the ground, we see a vision in his mind or maybe it's like just magic, but he is being taken to heaven, basically, like the Greek, ancient Roman version of heaven, the fields of Elysium, where he can see his dead wife and his dead child, and he's going off to meet them, and like that's where we sort of leave Maximus. It doesn't feel like devastating because we see, okay, he may have died, but he gets to have his own version of happiness. All right, nice answers there. Thanks, Carmen. And thanks, everybody. That's going to wrap our class for today. Hope that you guys got some good info from this. Let's look at, you saw how to enroll. Let's just see what's coming up next at Script Camp. We have table reads. Sunday, 2 p.m., you can submit up to 5 pages to get your script read in the group and get feedback on it. You can submit your feature or pilot, and if you spend 100 script coins, you can buy a reading of that as well. Deadline passed a little bit ago for that, but there'll be more ones coming up. Here's what script coins are. You can type in $coins in any chat channel to get info about them, but you can earn them just by giving feedback and participating in activities and classes, and you can spend them on things like little hats and mouse pads and things like that, or you spend them on table reads or membership. Writer's Lab is Saturday 4 to 6. That's like office hours. You can come in and get help on whatever you want, up to 5 pages of material to look at, or just whatever topics and questions you have that you want answered or expanded upon. We have free t-shirts if you send Nacho a message with your size and the address, and you get a shirt, and you can rep up Script Camp or whatever. You can refer a friend. They will get discounted membership. You will get a free month. You can do that as many times as you want. let's look at the classes coming up. We have a horror thriller class series coming up. The first one's free. That's May 21st, 12 to 2. That's Saturday, 12 to 2. And that should be really fun. I'm teaching that brand new horror thriller course. I think we'll have the first class will be free, and then the ones after that you'll need membership for. We have table reads that is open to everybody as well. Lab is for members, so make sure that if you want to attend a lab, you sign up for membership. And here's a full schedule of upcoming classes. We have Where the Story Begins, which is the beginning of your script on Wednesday and Thursday, 25th and 26th. Then we have outlining, exposition, action, dialogue, endings, scene work, and characters after that. I'll leave this up for a moment and dismiss everybody and say thank you for coming. If you're interested in horror thriller, in the chat channel, Nacho just left a link that you can click interested there, and you will get a notification when it's starting up. You're not committing to pay or doing anything like that, but it'll just give you a buzz when the class is beginning. Let me just, I'll say you're free to go. Thank you all so much for coming. Let me just stay and answer questions for any questions you guys have about Script Camp or how to sign up or anything like that, or maybe just about if you have any last questions on theme for today. I will stay for like 1 to 2 minutes. Anyone have anything before we go? All right, I suppose not. Thank you so much for coming by, folks. Hope that you all have a great night, and we'll see you, if you're already a camper, we'll see you at the upcoming boot camps this weekend. All right, thanks, folks.
Also,
go ahead.
Just want to mention the deadline to submit your script for the table reads is tomorrow. So
it's tomorrow.
Everybody,
gotcha.
Yeah, it's tomorrow at midnight is the deadline.
I sent mine.
So,
yay!
Yep. I'll just post that in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, we'll call it here.
Thank
folks.
you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for coming. Please sign up for Script Camp. We'll see you at something soon. Have a great night.